Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Because this topic is very near and dear to my heart, and because I have a need to translate my words into Spanish for this video, I have decided to write a speech and read it verbatim in this lecture. Spanish-speaking listeners should be able to access Spanish subtitles on this YouTube video, as well as download a translated version of this lecture in its written form in the description below. Also, I will add that this lecture has been approved by our leader and co-founder, Hermetic Lamp, the chief who stands under the seal of the alchemical salt. Thus, it is an official lecture of the Congregation of the Lamp of Invisible Light. I will add, humbly, that I myself am an oath-bound consecrated priestess and illuminated hermit of the congregation, and that I have recently assumed the role of the chief under the seal of the alchemical sulfur. I say this only to emphasize that I do have at least some minor authority to speak on this topic. But more importantly, my heart is in this lecture, as the time I am putting into writing this speech is a small price I pay willingly in comparison to how dearly I adore the congregation and our ritual. As this lecture is very long, I've split it into 8 parts over 2 videos. I have time marked each part for easier navigation in case one subject in particular interests the listener. With that, let us begin. Part 1. Aleister Crowley starts the Order of the Lamp of Invisible Light. In the year 1900, Aleister Crowley was traveling through Mexico. He writes about this in his autohagiography, The Confessions of Aleister Crowley. Several huge events occurred for Crowley at this time. First off, back in the UK, trouble was brewing within the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Many initiates were upset about Mathers allowing Crowley to be initiated to the Second Order, 5th degree equals 6 square. Amongst those most upset were the poet William Yeats and author on occult history Arthur Edward Waite. There were many at that time who were allowed into the Second Order, not for their magical aptitude, but because they were of wealth or nobility, and Mathers was susceptible to the glamour of leadership and his desire to open lodges through Europe on the pound of those whom he could get money from. As stuck-up as many of them were, they despised Crowley and resented and disputed Mathers permitting Crowley to the grade of Zelator Adeptus Minor. I will not go extensively into the history of the Golden Dawn, as that is talked about ad nauseum, but rather I mention this strife because as Crowley was leaving the UK to the Americas for the first time, Mathers bid Crowley to initiate. The two were close, and I suspect Mathers hoped that together they could gain a large enough following themselves to quell the coming storm within the order over Crowley's initiation, and upset that the Golden Dawn had no access to grades above Zelator Adeptus Minor at that time. Regardless of all of that, Crowley now had access to the Z documents, which you can read in Israel Regardie's publication, The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Crowley being Crowley, he took interest in the idea of invisibility, which had a skeleton format in one of the Z documents. He also now had access to the Enochian system as outlined for the Second Order, and Frater Perdurabo, he who shall endure to the end, had his eyes set on progressing magically as far as possible. All of this was brewing together in his consciousness, and in the coming days of traveling through Mexico City, he would realize a name for an order using the title of the first Aether, L.I.L, as an acronym. As Crowley was in the midst of creating the first Order of the Lamp of Invisible Light, he was simultaneously interested in Freemasonry. This interest introduced him to Don Jesus Medina, quote, one of the highest chiefs of Scottish rite of Freemasonry, end quote, writes Crowley in the Confessions, chapter 23. While in Mexico, Crowley makes his first attempt to scry the Enochian Aethers. As is normal, he began with the 30th, Tex, and moved on to the 29th, Re-He, and stopped abruptly. Many magicians agree on this point, and Crowley writes near explicitly as well about scrying the Aethers, that a person attempting to scry the 30 Aethers will either be compelled to stop, become distracted and stop, or go forward and have little to no results if they are not ready to scry the next Aether. Such was what happened for him in Mexico. But his experience scrying and studying the Enochian system of John Dee and Edward Kelly, coupled with Mathers' blessing to prosecute the great work by initiating both new members to the Golden Dawn, as well as new working orders under the guiding principles of the GD, led to the birth of the Order of the Lamp of Invisible Light. Don Jesus Medina, by request from Crowley to become an initiate to Freemasonry, initiates Crowley into the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry to the 33rd degree. If you are interested in this subject, there is a link to an article in the description about Crowley and Freemasonry. Otherwise, there is much in the Confessions, especially chapter 72. In kind, Medina was interested in the magic of the GD, and together with Crowley they formed L.I.L, and Medina is made a High Priest. Again, due to Crowley's interest in invisibility and from the Z documents, scrying the Enochian Aethers, and his upbringing in the radical Christian sect from his childhood called the Plymouth Brethren, which indoctrinated him with the Holy Bible, parentheses, not to mention his interest in the Book of Revelation especially, all of this went into the rituals of L.I.L. It is of note, before diving into the original group's rituals, that Enochian magic is thought to bring forth the apocalypse. But fret not, it is the vulgar uninitiated who take the Bible seriously that fear this. Magic brings about a personal apocalypse, revelation of one's innermost self, not the end of the world. Thus, as we will see, this is a possible reason that Crowley chose to add a selection of ideas from the Book of Revelation to this group's ritual. Part 2. The Hermetic Lamp. What is the lamp of the hermit? And how does a magician use this magical weapon, the Hermetic Lamp? Upon the dawn of man and the transition from beast to a creature that uses and makes tools, one of our first and most beneficial advances was wielding fire and light. Think of how many ways, through the centuries and even today, that fire and light have been harnessed and utilized. Could such a list be made? Can you imagine how long it would be? Enormous. Is it any wonder, then, that the lamp has such a profound effect upon the psyche? I cannot name the first time that the lamp was used in a symbolic, religious, or spiritual way, but I know that it has been prevalent in damn near every religion worldwide for a long, long time. The Hindus, one of the oldest religions still practiced today, have a goddess named Jyoti, meaning light or lamp. How many cultures revert to the highest, or gods and goddesses, or the source itself simply as light or the light? Innumerable. Well, since the origin is lost to me, I will speed forward to the 1400s. The tarot was becoming a popular game in Europe, and both the Milanese tarocchi and Maricel's deck both had images of a hermit who wielded a magical lamp. This is not a lecture on the tarot. I mention it as the tarot does pertain to both the concept of the lamp and the ritual of the congregation of the Lamp of Invisible Light, for 7 of the major arcana found themselves in our ritual. But again, what then is this lamp? Quite simply, it is a light in the darkness. It is held by the elder to guide others through the night unto the golden dawn, to show anyone gone astray or lost where they can find the path. But also, it is a tool vital to warding a sacred space from malignant or unwanted forces. How does the lamp function magically? Despite the fact that there are a ton of ways to think about it or implement this weapon, to me, the most fundamental way to think of the lamp is summed up by Crowley in Magic Book 4, Part 2, Chapter 10, The Lamp. Though short, in this chapter there are several key lines to consider the lamp under. I quote, "This lamp is the light of the pure soul. It hath no need of fuel. It is the burning bush, inconsumable, that Moses saw, the image of the Most High. When the eyes of the magus are fixed upon this lamp, naught else exists. Lamp is not made with hands. It exists alone forever. It has no parts, no person. It is before I am. Few can behold it, yet it is always there. For in it there is no here nor there, no then nor now. Without this light the magician could not work at all. Yet few indeed are the magicians that have known of it, and far fewer they that have beheld its brilliance." End quote. And lastly, in Magic, Part 2, Chapter 3, quote, "Within this altar everything is kept, since everything is subject to the law, except the lamp." End quote. The lamp is attributed to the first Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, Cather. Inside the lamp shines the divine light itself. Even when the wick is not aflame, the magical lamp still shines, for the astral light or aether is bright within it always. This tells us that the light from which all things have become as they are is in the light of the lamp of the hermit. It is much more than just a torch. Being in a ritual and beholding this light in its most pure, unadulterated form is a thing of brilliance. The lamp, then, is a source of inspiration, if not creation itself. No wonder it would ward a sacred space from beings not fit to be present. With these connotations magically bound to the magical lamp, in its symbolic form, it is extraordinarily impressionable upon the psyche of those who look upon it. Most everything in Hermetic occultism can be viewed through the lens of the age-old axiom, as above, so below. The lamp is no different. In its highest sense, the lamp symbolically carries the light of Kether. In a lower way, it is intertwined with the keyword Ararita. Here, the letters AR, ARTA are attributed to the 6 points of the hexagram, and the I, or Hebrew character Yod, rather, is positioned in the center of the hexagram, where would be placed Tiferet, the sun. Yod, of Yod-He-Vav-He, tetragrammaton, is the letter which represents the Hermetic element fire. From the Zohar, we are informed that the letter Yod rests in Chachma, the Father, and its tip touches Kether itself. In this way, it is graced by direct connection to the divine light. Thus the lamp, even in its lower sense, still shines with the light of Kether, for the flame within an illumined lamp is symbolic of the letter Yod, and corresponds with the center of the hexagram in Tiferet, the only sphere below the abyss that is connected directly together. Keep this in mind when I speak about the ritual of the congregation of the lamp of invisible light in the next video, part 2. Part 3. The original ritual. In David Matichak's Pyramidos, chapter 8, the book of the Spirit of the Living God, that author eloquently breaks down much of what is said above, puts together the rituals of the original L.I.L, and explains their structure as it originated much from the neophyte ceremony of the GD and later inspired Liber Pyramidos for AA. I highly recommend reading Matichak's Pyramidos if you can acquire a copy, and if not, you may email me for a PDF of Chapter 8 and Appendix 3, which contains info about Crowley's order L.I.L. I fear leaving a link below due to the possibility of copyright infringement and how that might thus corrupt my present work at hand. Also, please keep in mind that I do not wish to detract from the sole topic of this lecture, L.I.L, and CLIL, the Congregation of the Lamp of Invisible Light, by going any further into the initiation rituals of the Golden Dawn, or AA, than is possible, but did feel it especially important to mention Chapter 8 of Matichak's book. In the description, there is a link for the original ritual of Crowley's L.I.L, which he titled, The Ritual of a Consecration of an High Priest of L.I.L. This is what I am here going to refer to, and will explain, breaking it down piecemeal. There is also a link to the book of the Spirit of the Living God, as it demonstrates what can be done with the Z documents of the GD. This latter text was written by or before 1901, and would have been given to Medina after joining the Order of the Lamp of Invisible Light. I'm speaking about this consecration ceremony of the Order of the L.I.L. for the sake of occult knowledge and as a segue to our current congregation of the Lamp of Invisible Light. I recommend following along with my analysis via the images I will provide in this video. To fully explain the consecration of an high priest, I will rely upon the source material coupled with Regardie's Golden Dawn book, Matichak's Pyramidos, my knowledge of Enochian magic, the Hermetic Kabbalah, the Bible, as well as other works published by Crowley later in his life. I'll do my best to explain this in such a way that even a layman will be able to understand and follow. I must add that aside from a small activation of the lamp and taking the oath upon it, the ritual of Crowley's original L.I.L was actually not centered on the lamp, but really on employing the magic of the Golden Dawn, as you shall see shortly. To begin, the Jupiter invoking ritual of the hexagram is performed after the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram and hexagram, purification with water and consecration with incense, as would be normal for any ceremony of high caliber. In my opinion, I find the use of the Jupiter hexagram opening to imply for the station of the high priest in that of Chesed, as this sphere represents governance, and in many traditions bishops reside therein. or leaders, whether that be of a spiritual, educational, or political variety. It says to invoke spirit also. This can be done with either the greater pentagram ritual for spirit, which I think was less likely to have been done, than the supreme invoking ritual of the pentagram, which not only utilizes the tablet of union from the invoking system, but also the spirit pentagrams. Either would work well. Matichak states in his Pyramidos that with so much on the altar and setup indicating Tefereth, the sun, by invoking Jupiter, the path of Yod is implied as the path connects them. Yod corresponds to the hermit of the tarot, and that he bears the magical lamp to guide through the darkness. This idea resonates intently with me, and I find it plausible. To quote the ritual, the temple has, in the south, a coffin, in the east, a lamp or flaming bowl, in the west, a sword, in the north, a bowl of bitterly cold alcohol, in the center, an altar with the star of magic light. North, south, east, west are salt, fire, rosewater. The coffin is symbolic of Osiris. The south of Tefereth connects via Nun, the death card of the tarot, to Netzach. So it could imply that in the south, death is indicated symbolically by a coffin. Also note that in Egyptian mythology, the south was considered evil, for hot air which burned crops was carried by the wind from the deserts in the south, and thus all malignant entities were attributed thereunto. In the east is the lamp, for the light of Kether, or the Yod in the center of the hexagram, when Ararita is scribed around it. The sword is air, placed in the west, is merely indicative of the middle pillar in general, and Yesod below Tefereth. Cold alcohol in the north, for night, when the sun is set and earth is dark. Alcohol is made of earthy substances, fermented and distilled, and I find it appropriate in a way. This arrangement follows the cardinal signs of the zodiac: Aries, fire in the east; Capricorn, earth in the south; Libra, air in the west; Cancer, water in the north. And the pillars of mercy, fire, and severity, water, are indicated by the coffin in the south and alcohol in the north. On the altar, the star is a hexagram, and with rose water is symbolic of Tefereth. The salt and fire could indicate the alchemical principles of salt and sulfur, with the rose water indicating mercury as a spagyric tincture. Like neophyte initiations of many traditions, the candidate is bound and hoodwinked. This has been explained elsewhere infinitely, but suffice to say, it is to indicate that they are as helpless as a babe upon the path at this point, and not until they apply their will by taking an oath do they be unbound and liberated with bodily autonomy. Matichak connects much of this ceremony to Pyramidos, and while I agree with and love his work, here I only wish to explain the ceremony as it stands at that time in 1900 EV, not what it would later influence, save for our revival of C.L.I.L., which will be discussed at length in part 2 of this video series. The candidate is asked who they are, from whence they came, and whither will they go. The answers would be provided should one be unable to answer in proper fashion, but in initiation, asking such questions sometimes makes interesting ideas arise from the candidate's unconsciousness, and is very useful for meditation later. The next question forces an answer that is humble, and that is vital, for humility may bring great yields, especially through vulnerability. The next item of importance is that the adept asks, "Hast thou naught to sacrifice unto the guardians of the ways?" To which the candidate responds, "The breath of my nostrils, the flesh of my body, the tears of mine eyes, and the blood of my heart." And the adept adds to their list, "the silence of thy tongue." These 5 sacrifices are the 5 elements. Breath is air, flesh is earth, tears are water, blood is fire, silence is spirit. The 5 parts of the body these come from indicate the planets: the nostrils as Venus and Mars, the flesh as Earth, but Mercury if the brain is included as flesh or fleshy material, or I argue that the body is what goes. Eyes are Jupiter and Saturn, the heart is the sun. Thus are the 5 elements extracted alchemically from the 7 classical planets in this ritual. Whether or not that was Crowley's intent is unbeknownst to me, but I find it a remarkable note nonetheless. It is clear that prior to this ritual, the candidate has already signed the oath, but now it is read aloud in a sacred space of high magic of light, in the presence of guardians of the light and mysteries. Further, their oath is taken with hands upon the lamp itself, rather than upon a holy book such as the Bible, which would be common to Freemasonry. Taking an oath upon the lamp, I can liken to swearing upon the light of creation itself, a way of truly offering one's soul as collateral damage. The next 5 exchanges of adept and candidate now transition from introduction to the ritual at hand. They are a series of knowledge and instruction. Also, as a practicing Balaamite, it is interesting to me to see Crowley as a magician more heavily influenced by biblical and Jewish Kabbalistic matters, rather than that of the Book of the Law. It is a very different Crowley indeed. Pause the video if you would like to read these highlighted passages. References are made here to Yod He Vav He and the elements, indicating that Yod He Vav He and man are of the same composition, and that man is not merely made in the likeness of Elohim. Man's anatomy is the same as the Lord's. The first 2 long paragraphs in the ritual are made up of verses from the Old Testament, or Tanakh, which include but are not limited to select verses of Judges and Exodus. The first paragraph is fiery, mentioning war, armies, and strength. The second is watery, speaking of the great ability of the Lord. They each mention lightning and thunder, bringing the idea to indicate the pillars of severity and mercy respectively, as well as the ability of beings that are aligned with the idea of the demiurgos, such as Yod He Vav He and Zeus, and thus the highest and the middle pillar. Yod He Vav He in the Golden Dawn was the guardian of the abyss, concealing Eden from man who had fallen. This further indicates that the middle pillar is implied by the other 2 invoked through biblical passages. Next off, the candidate is led around the temple to the east and west quarters, and the 4 elemental spirit races are invoked: salamanders in the south, undine in the west, sylphs in the east, gnomes in the west, making nearly 2 full circumambulations. In the west, the candidate is led into the coffin and it is closed, instilling the idea in the candidate from what we now call the old aeon that the sun dies in the west. This idea has found its way into pop culture heavily over the last several centuries, so much so that even fantasy authors such as Tolkien utilized the idea of a person's life symbolically starting at birth in the east and ending with death in the west. I'll digress back to the ritual by saying that in the new aeon, you may read about this idea of the sun and human life cycles in the blue equinox, stepping out of the old aeon into the new, pages 183 to 186, a chapter submitted by Charles Stanfield Jones. Here in the coffin, the candidate hears the adept speak about death, dust to dust, and the candidate is now inside the Mother of Earth, Gaia. Next, verses are recited from the Book of Revelation. The ideas expressed on the Apocalypse, Adam and Christ, are very aligned with papers from the Golden Dawn, and they indicate that man, and thus Adam Kadmon, are one with Yod He Shin Vav He, Yahashua, spirit being added to the 4 elements of Yod He Vav He. Also is the idea expressed of resurrection in an infinitely more Gnostic sense than in the Roman Catholic Church. Here, the candidate is symbolically dying and being reborn, whilst knowledge is imparted to them about death and reincarnation. There are lines which are written next. Quote, "Let the dead rise from their tombs. I am the resurrection and the life. I am he that liveth and was dead. And behold, I am alive for evermore. Amen. And have the keys of hell and of death. Let the dead rise from their tombs." End quote. This actually identifies the initiate with Christ, as well as Christian Rosenkreutz and Hermes. It demonstrates that the esoteric interpretation of Christ rising from the dead is not only that reincarnation is a fact of life, energy, and the soul, but also that through initiation, the candidate is destroyed and made anew. It is noteworthy that this candidate has embarked here on a heroic journey, such as one of the Greek classics. They are descending into the depths of the underworld alive in the flesh, are coming through, changed and awakened to the mysteries of life and death. Later in Crowley's magical career, around 1920 in Cefalo, when he took the grade of Magus, 9th degree equals 2 square. He wrote in his magical record, as well as expressed the following idea in both his comment on the Book of the Law and in an unfinished fictional work titled The Fish as an appendix. This idea being Hermes/Mercury's. Mercury is one in the same with Christ for going to the underworld. Hermes went to Hades, Christ to purgatory and hell. Both are linked through the symbol of the fish, for the rainbow of its scales reflect not only the rainbow as the light refracted through Kether into Chachma, but also Joseph's coat of many colors. This, among other things, places Hermes and Christ as correspondences to Chachma. Then the candidate is called to thrice, quote, "In the name of Osiris, I say unto thee, arise," end quote. Here the candidate is identified with Yahashua, the dying and reborn God whom the Golden Dawn identified with Osiris. Now the candidate is led to the altar to kneel and finally unblindfolded. There are 4 lines that read, Lux umbra Christi, false logos uiu, dawn promise of light, LPD, LVX, the flaming star of light. This statement is profound, and this is partially explained in the following lectern paragraphs of the ritual, but I will add some brief points. The literal translation is, light and dark are in Christ. In a way, the Word of God is the sun or the sun. Dawn promises the light. LPD, LVX, the flaming star of light. In Hermetic Kabbalah, Christ, who is seated at the right hand of the Father, is positioned in Chachma, the second sphere just below Kether. He is also the Son of the Highest, thus the Prince of the Tarot, whose seat is in the Ruach, that of Tifereth, the same place as then what was called the higher genius, today what we call the holy guardian angel. Though keep in mind, indeed, these two things, the genius and the angel, are not the same at all. They are similar after a certain fashion, though. The golden dawn, the coming of the sun after a long night, marks attainment to adepthood. I am hesitant to explain the balance of duality that is symbolized in the letters LPD, so suffice with the explanation that is given by the adept during the ritual. The newly arisen high priest is robed, crowned, and bestowed with a magical wand. They are then granted knowledge of the word of the order and its response, a grip and sign to recognize other members. Also a password was given, and it was highly likely that it would come from a lengthy ceremony of divination as they did in the Golden Dawn, and continue to do in the AA. You can read about this in Rigardi's Golden Dawn book under the ceremony for the equinox. Of all this, I will only read now the explanation of the grand word and its response from the ritual at hand, because although there certainly is occult and esoteric value in such, I prefer to leave that knowledge to initiates rather than explaining in a public lecture. So, the grand word is LPD, answered by LVX. The secret meaning of the first is the blood of the Lamb. For the Greek letters LPD combined give a fire triangle atop a W, DM in Coptic, and these again give the Hebrew word dam, which means blood, which by Tamura yield kar, which equals lamb, by value. LVX is the mystic expansion of the cross or Hebrew tau, and if this letter is inserted in the midst of a kar, we have Kether in Hebrew script. Kether the crown. The age of the priesthood is 114 years from LPD's value, and it refers to the mourning of Isis over the slain Osiris, that is, to the lamentation of the priesthood over their country. For Daleth Mem Ain means tear, a corresponding sign of greeting. The priests weep or sigh heavily. The answer is 65, and the elder priest is glad, saying, Adonai hath shone in his palace. The other is glad also, and replies, Keep silence. By virtue of which mystic words and signs I now declare thee, fitted to sacrifice before the Most High. For in the name of Yahashua art thou admitted to the mysteries hereof. Now, after these signs, grip, and password knowledge portion of the ritual, it says, Quote, "Sacrifice thou therefore the four into the one, cast this limpid fluid into the bowl, light thereon the flame, place the incense and the salt therein. Done." End quote. This is describing the alchemical aspect of the great work, the reduction of the four elements of the adept thrown into alembic and boiled to putrefaction. In other words, all ingredients for attainment are present, and it is now time for the high priest to further purify their being, consecrate their life to the great work, and continue on until union with the highest has been achieved. Let the spirit of the gods descend. This now indicates that the man who entered the temple for initiation is now a vessel of God, no different and no less holy. The adept performs a final invocation of Yod He Shin Vav He, blessing the new high priest with the Holy Ghost through Iao, and tells the candidate, "Whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven." This statement has a profound meaning, that heaven and earth are one. There is no difference for Kether and Malkuth. Everything past and future is in the here and now. To explain this concept further would prove useless, as it requires experience to understand. To one such as Don Jesus Medina, this may not be such a huge revelation, but I could imagine a person new to the occult hearing this for the first time and coming to understand the truth. They would be much more impressed at the gravity of reality under this lens of occultism. In the closing paragraphs, the candidate is told a final piece of knowledge concerning their divinity. The candidate has been raised up to the level of the gods. Ever scribed is their magical name in the book of thought. And finally, with a warning, the ritual is ended as they are guided to the lamp in the east. Quote, "This is thy blood, the symbol of thy life. For it shall be for a sign that thou hast shedded willingly for men. Or if thou failest in thine oath, it shall be a practical and material link whereby the chiefs of the order shall the more speedily and easily execute vengeance upon thee, yea, unto the uttermost. Return then to the altar and kneel in humble prayer unto the gods, that they may hold thee in their hands to keep thee in all thy ways." End quote. The ritual closes in Latin with the statement has the same effect as knocking to either teletestai or cobs on pact. In English it says, "It is be done, on the virgin's fruitlessness, to the glory of the rose cross, to mother's love, back to the father's life, to the light, to glory, your ineffable name, Amun." We're getting close to ending this first video, but I feel the need to bring up some points about the Book of the Spirit of the Living God, published in the Equinox Volume 1, Number 3, The Temple of Solomon the King. This text contains 2 rituals for the Order of the Lamp of Invisible Light. The first section is an oration, which both summarizes the content of the ceremony and turns this summary into a prayer. Then it goes on to sections titled The Obligation, The Invocation of Isis, The Chant, and the Mystic Dance. The second ritual is for the great operation of invisibility and an exorcism. I will not endeavor to break down this text, as I did for the consecration ritual, but I will give an overview, as it was post-initiation text given to Don Jesus Medina, and clearly considered by Crowley to be fundamental to both the Order L.I.L, as well as his mission from Mathers to initiate. It opens with Hebrew, which I'll here translate. It reads in English, "The Book of the Excrement of the Divine." After the opening oration is a paragraph in brackets where it is written, "The aspirant having fasted for 9 days, during which he constantly aspireth unto the higher, shall now enter the temple." This is instructing that for those 9 days the aspirant is bringing down energy of the moon, which connects to Pharith, the heart and soul, with the highest, Kether, the sphere of the divine light. We later find that this ritual is to attain unto the knowledge and conversation of his holy genius, and it makes sense that the temple will be centered in the Ruach, the 6 spheres just below the Kabbalistic abyss. I highly recommend studying this text. I have not the space in this video to break it down line by line, but after the oath is taken, insight is given to the high priest, that relating to the path of Tav, its connection with the Rood and LVX, and banishing the flaming sword which bars access to Eden, that which is accounted in two important documents from the GD, the Garden of Eden before and after the fall. Further on, the Enochian keys are employed with the supreme invoking ritual of the pentagram, and finally the ritual of the Bornless One. There is a formula apparent to me of moving from Malkuth to Tifereth through the path of Tau, and from there invoking Isis to channel through the path of Gimel, the light of Kether. After that, there are two small sections of the chant and mystic dance which end the ceremony. It is rather incredible the wealth of magical practices that are condensed in so small a book. This includes invocations of divine names and deities, uses of Enochian keys, and nearly everything one needs to begin a very serious magical regimen. We can see that a person receiving this text would have access to quite a lot from the Golden Dawn, and can choose any of these sections to use as solitary practices, be they mantra, ritual, dance, theurgy, or even exorcism. In a way, I think it may have been too haphazardly thrown together, which can make it incredibly confusing to properly utilize without such lengthy explanation as was given with it in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn through the first 6 grades. If anything, this may very well be why the Order of L.I.L. didn't last after Crowley left Mexico, and although the original L.I.L. was to close, it was undoubtedly an important step for Crowley's magical career, as it was his first attempt at creating a magical order, one which influenced many influential texts he would come to write, and provided a stepping stone for him from Mather's Golden Dawn to his own AA. Indeed, in the Temple of Solomon the King from the Equinox, Crowley makes at least 2 notable mentions of L.I.L., one which states, quote, Frater P, in one way, completed the work of L.I.L. at the end of the year 1900, but in another, it took him 9 long years of toil before he perfected it, end quote. To this I will paraphrase what Matichak writes. It is clear that the work of L.I.L. was important enough to Crowley that his statement implies it was responsible for the founding of AA in 1909, especially for construction of his Liber Pyramidos, end quote. The great operation of invisibility is very impressive. It is interesting in regards to the invisible light of the lamp. It comes from the skeleton in the Z document, and I consider it a privilege to see a young Crowley initiated only 2 years prior, taking that skeleton and turning it into a fully fleshed out ceremony. A tongue can be said on each part of it, and the exorcism section that follows, but instead I will read 2 select passages from the Confessions on invisibility. I quote, I worked also at acquiring the power of invisibility. I reached a point when my physical reflection in a mirror became faint and flickering. It gave very much the effect of the interrupted images of the cinematograph in its early days. But the real secret of invisibility is not concerned with the laws of optics at all. The trick is to prevent people noticing you when they would normally do so. In this I was quite successful. For example, I was able to take a walk in the street in a golden crown and a scarlet robe without attracting attention. Another part from the Confessions quotes, And now comes a curious circumstance. My experiments in Mexico City in making myself invisible have been recorded with considerable detail, and it will be remembered that I was far from satisfied with the results. I had reached the flickering condition, but I had never succeeded in putting myself out completely. But on this occasion, when my unconscious self seems to have had me in hand throughout, I made myself invisible right enough. The report of the pistol, the screams, for all I know, of the wounded or frightened men, and the alarm given by the fugitives had aroused the entire district. A European was a rare bird in that quarter at that time of night, and no native would be likely to have such a gun. No doubt, too, the whole assault had been watched from the beginning, and it must have been denounced descriptively. I remember clearly enough noting with a type of amusement, which I must really admit to having something devilish in its composition, that the streets through which I passed were filled with wildly excited crowds, all looking for me. Quote, But he passed through the midst of them, went this way. End quote. I am aware that this sounds like a fish story, but as a matter of fact, people who live with me for the last 3 years or so have noticed that I make myself invisible quite frequently, and that apparently, when I am not aware that I am doing so, there is a particular type of self-absorption which makes it impossible for people to be aware of one. In these recent cases, the observer who could see me quite plainly because in sympathy with me, could also see that the other people in the street, or whatever it was, could not see me at all. My theory is that the mental state in question distracts people's attention from one automatically, as a conjurer does deliberately. I can transfer this property of invisibility, however, even to inanimate objects. For instance, a police officer recently came to my house in search of a certain thing which he named. I admitted that I had possessed it. I showed it to him. I insisted on his seeing, smelling, tasting, and touching it. But he left the house and reported he had been unable to find it. In this particular instance, I knew what I was doing. I deliberately overwhelmed his mind with my earnestness in helping him and other objects of thought. I cut the connecting link between his senses and his mind. This was all from the Confessions of Aleister Crowley. This here ends the second part of this lecture. Love is the law, love under will. Very soon I will be recording and posting a part 2 to this video series. This first part was all about the original order of L.I.L, invisibility in the lamp. This second one will be about the revival of the Congregation of the Lamp of Invisible Light. Ex lux soror R.A.